let's turn on SSH. So in order to turn on SSH, we need a few things on our router that aren't on there by default. So we have to set up a domain name for our device. So if we're part of a large organization, we most likely already have a domain name like trainsignal.com or globalmantics.com or google.com, you name it. So we need to establish what that domain name is and configure it on the router. If you are just in a small lab environment or you're in a local organization and you don't really have a domain name, but you still have a router you need to configure with SSH, ultimately, the domain name doesn't much matter. You can call it anything you want. If you're concerned about that name being used inappropriately, come up with some name like router.local or rossrouter.local or rossescompany.local. It doesn't have to be my name, of course. Make it any name you want. So the way we set this domain name is we type IP domain dash name at global config mode prompt. Global config mode means that my prompt here has parenthesis config parenthesis in it. And then I set the domain name. And I'm going to make this trainsignal.local. If you use the .local extension as the top level domain name here, we won't have to worry about it interfering with anything else because we're just going to be using it locally. Ultimately, the purpose of this domain name is to help us with one of the next steps in the process, which is to create a key for our device. And that key is going to be based on our host name of our device, which cannot be the default host name of router. Cannot be the default host name of router. Must be some other name besides router. So we're going to use the host name of our device plus a domain name, and that's going to be used to generate a key. Before we generate our key, the next step that we have to do is create a user. So to do that, I issue the command username, and then I make up a name that I want to use, in this case, Ross. It can be anything you want, as long as it fits the characters of this particular command. It's just any word. I recommend not using words like admin or administrator. So we'll pick Ross as my username here. I press the question mark key. It gives me all these options. And really all I need to do here is set a password. And I'm going to set that password to Cisco. Once again, I recommend not using Cisco for all of your passwords in your production environment. I'm doing it here to help you in a learning environment understand how to configure the device. What ends up happening a lot of times is as we're learning, if we don't use a standard password here, we end up forgetting what we've configured as the password, and then we can't access our device, and then we have a whole separate problem that we have to deal with. So in the beginning, while you're learning how to configure the router, keep your passwords identical. And then as you need to move that device into production, make sure you absolutely, with certainty, change those passwords. Because if you're going to move a device into production, you do not want every single password on the device to be Cisco. People will be able to break into it very easily, change stuff, shut your network down, configure the router to mirror information to a different port possibly, send traffic elsewhere, a whole host of things we don't want happening. So piece 2 there was set up the username and password. Next, now that we have a host name set up, which I've already instructed you in the router config video to always change your host name anyway. So we've changed our host name to Ross Router. We've set the domain name to trainsignal.local. Now we can finally generate the cryptography key in order to encrypt the traffic between my router and my SSH client. To do that, it's a pretty lengthy command, and I recommend following it very precisely because if you don't, it won't work. So the command is crypto key generate, and then I have to double check here, RSA. Then we want general keys. We want to set the modulus, and the modulus is the number of bits in the key, and we want that number to be at least 1024, if not higher. So once we press enter, it generates the key. And once it generates the key, it immediately enables SSH. So this log message we see here says SSH enabled 1.99. Well, it's SSH version 1.99. Well, there's an SSH version 2 that's more secure and works better. So to enable that as one of the last steps here, the second last step, we type in IP SSH version 2. And that will now turn on SSH version 2 instead of 1.99. The very last step is that we have to set up our virtual terminal lines now to ignore connections from Telnet. Because by default now, this router will allow me to either Telnet to it or SSH to it. I can do both. I don't want to do both. I only want to SSH. Why? SSH is encrypted. Telnet is not. So if I want to pass all of my usernames, passwords, and configuration information in an encrypted session, I have to use SSH, which means that I want to disable Telnet as my last step here. So to disable Telnet, I have to go into line VTY 0 through 4, which are my virtual terminal lines. And now here I want to issue the command transport input SSH, and I press enter. And now what that's done is it's shut down access to Telnet, and it's enabled access to SSH, and SSH only. Great. Let's save our config by issuing the copy running config to startup config command. Remember, anything in the brackets here is the default information, so you don't need to type anything. If you want to save your file as startup config, you can just press the enter key. Anything between those brackets is default. Let's test it out. So let's first make sure Telnet is disabled. So I'll try to Telnet into the router by telnetting to 10.0.0.1. And it shuts it down right away. So no Telnet connection appears to be available. Let's try SSH 10.0.0.1. Well, this is promising. It says the server's host key is not cached in your registry. You have no guarantee that the server is a computer you think it is. Well, what's going on here is certificates are unique identifiers for a specific workstation. And typically, we have a registry that we use, like VeriSign or Symantec, to check to make sure that the host name of the device we're connecting to matches the certificate that's generated for that device. For our case here, I generated that certificate on my device by myself. I know I did it, and I know the IP address of that device that I'm connecting to. Because at this point, there's only two devices on my network, my PC and the router. So this message that I'm getting, the security error, is an important one. However, it does not apply when we're configuring the router because we oftentimes do not register the certificate on the router with some type of entity that lets us bypass this error message. So I'm not a huge fan of saying, hey, just bypass all your security messages. As a matter of fact, I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is, we know that our router is 10.0.0.1. That's what we connected to. We definitely know that this key is correct here because we configured it, and there's only two devices on our network. So we can hit yes here. It immediately pops up with a login prompt. I enter my username that I've configured. It will then ask me for a password, and I enter that password, which was Cisco. Oh, access denied. I wonder what's happening here. Well, let's go back and take a look. Maybe I typed in my username wrong, or my password wrong. So let's try that again. Nope, definitely not working. So let's go see if we can find out what's going on. So what I'm going to do is go back to the serial port, and we're going to issue show running config here to take a look at what's configured. So I have a host name set. My enable secret is set. I have a username here of Ross with a password. We have IP SSH version 2 turned on. We set our transport input to be SSH on our VTY lines, which appears everything is correct. So let's try something different. So let's do show run again. And let's just look through it one more time. I'm not sure what's wrong at this moment, but let's double check. Like I said, we have a username set up. That's correct. We have SSH turned on and version 2 turned on. We have transport input SSH here on line VTY 0 through 4. However, I do see some configuration missing here. Now, this logon command, or login command, what that's telling us is saying, hey, ask me for a password when I log into the device. But this is an error I made during the configuration. I should have typed a different command there. And let's take a look. So I'm going to go VTY, if I can get there. Wow. VTY 0 through 4. And let's do login and then hit question mark and see what my options are. Well, I do have an option I can do here. I can enter the local keyword. And what that's going to do now is it's actually going to use the local username and password database to verify my access when I log into the device through SSH. If I just put login here, what will happen is it's going to try to use this password Cisco, except password Cisco is not affiliated with any username. So it causes the router confusion apparently when we do not have login local recorded at line VTY 0 through 4. So let's exit out of this and show our running configuration again. And now we have line VTY 0 through 4, password Cisco, which actually won't ever be used now. Login is local, meaning it's going to use the local user database for this. And we're only going to allow SSH as our transport input. Okay, so let's give this a try again. We're going to open up PuTTY, select SSH, 10.0.0.1, log in as Ross. My password is Cisco. Now I get access to my router. And now I'm connected via SSH. So my connection is completely encrypted this time. So this wraps up enabling SSH on our router, as well as giving you some tips and tricks to use the command line interface. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in more Train Signal videos.